The sea was black the morning I brought my warriors to the water's edge, and Ironhold rose from it like a fist. I had stood on this shore before. Twice in my reign I had sent men across that water with orders to breach the fortress and come back alive. Twice the boats had returned with fewer men than they had left with. Ironhold Stone was old, older than my bloodline, older than the memory of any wolf in Vardenmoor, and its gates had no visible seam, no hinge, no handle. The walls met the rock as if they had grown there, pushed up from the sea floor by the island's own bones. Even my best scouts, wolves who could read the faintest breath of air for information, had come back with nothing but the knowledge that there were voices inside. Male voices. One of them my son's. Aldrich had been taken 3 weeks ago. I did not let myself think of him in terms a father would use. He was my heir, I told myself, my bloodline's continuation, the wolf who would hold Vardenmoor after me. The Lord Corvith, who had seized Ironhold 4 years ago with a treasonous alliance and 17 hired swords, had taken him as a guarantee that I would not press the matter of the island's ownership. He had miscalculated. I had no intention of leaving my son in a stone box in the sea. My wolf stirred at my side. He was a gray wolf, not large by the standard of the pack's beasts. It was my wolf's nature to be quiet, compact, and absolute, and he had not left my shadow since Aldrich was taken. I had never known him to be still for this long. Usually my wolf moved, prowling the perimeter of the great hall, going ahead of me on the road, nosing through whatever I was reading. These 3 weeks he had simply stood at my heel and stared at the water. My second, Rannoch, came to stand beside me. He was the largest wolf in my guard and the bluntest mind I kept, qualities I valued, because Rannoch never told me things to soften them. "The scouts came back an hour ago," he said. "Same answer. The walls are solid, no seam on the eastern side, none on the north. The gate that used to face the old dock is gone, sealed. It's as if the island grew new skin over every opening." "It did," I said. "My lords, Ironhold was built as a keeper's fortress. The passage is open to a specific bloodline. Corvith sealed the outer face when he took it, mortared the visible openings, filled the dock entrance with cut stone. The real roads are inside the rock." I paused. I knew this 4 years ago. I did not act on it because I did not have the bloodline. Rannoch was quiet. I could feel him working toward the next question, so I answered it before he asked. "The last keeper's family was put out when Corvith moved in. The old man, Davin, died 2 winters ago in a village on the mainland coast. He had a daughter." I turned away from the water. "Fetch her." They brought her in from the camp's edge, where my council had apparently been holding her for the better part of an hour. I did not know what I had expected. The council had sent word that the woman was a castaway, Davin's daughter, who had been living on the mainland shore since her father's death, making a living mending nets, trading small repairs. Lord Furwick, who managed the council's more unpleasant administrative functions, had referred to her in his written account as a woman of doubtful allegiance and possible sympathy to Lord Corvith's faction. He had not explained his reasoning beyond the fact that she had not come forward voluntarily. She hadn't been told I wanted her. She had been taken from her village at first light, before she had finished her morning meal, and brought to the coast under guard. None of this was apparent from looking at her. She was perhaps 30 years old, with a face that had been weathered by sea, wind, and salt, not harshly, but honestly the way wood weathers in a good boat, taking the grain into itself and growing stronger. Her dress was plain and mended at one shoulder. She had no cloak. Her dark hair was tied back. She was not afraid. That was the thing I noticed first. She should have been, and she wasn't. She looked at me with the particular quality of attention that I associated with people who had learned, over a long time, to read situations accurately and quickly. She was assessing what I was going to ask her, not the fact that she'd been taken. She had apparently already assessed that and filed it somewhere, but what I needed. Lord Furwick stepped forward. He was a compact man, with a manner of speaking that always reminded me of someone defending a position they were not certain of. "This is the woman, my lord, Bryn, daughter of Davin, the former island keeper." He made a small sound that managed to communicate his skepticism about the words "former island keeper," as if the title were borrowed and slightly too large. "We have reason to believe she has maintained contact with those currently occupying the fortress." The woman, Bryn, turned her head and looked at Furwick with an expression of mild interest, as if he were a kind of weather she had observed before and was not alarmed by. "What reason?" I said. Furwick blinked. "My lord." "What reason do you have to believe that?" A pause. She has not been forthcoming about her activities on the coast, my lord, and she did not report to your council when word went out that we were looking for. The word went out 6 days ago, she said. Her voice was even, not loud, not deferential, simply even. I was 3 days walk up the coast mending the harbor nets at Comrie when it happened. I came as soon as I heard. Furwick opened his mouth. I raised one hand and he closed it. You heard we were looking for someone who knew the inside of Ironhold, I said. Yes. And you came. I came, she said, yes. Something in the word was careful in a way I couldn't immediately read. Not evasive, careful. She had thought about whether to come and decided to. I found myself wanting to know what the deciding had looked like, what had tipped her toward yes. My wolf moved. I felt it before I saw it, the shift of weight at my left heel, the quiet pad of his feet on the wet rock of the shore. He moved around me and walked, without any instruction or hesitation, directly to where Bryn was standing. He had not done this in 20 years. He had not approached a stranger, not a member of the guard, not a council member, not a visitor from another pack in 20 years. Not since my mate died and his grief had folded him inward. He walked to anyone I indicated and he returned when I called him, but that was function, not choice. This was choice. He stopped at her feet and sat. She looked down at him, then she looked at me. May I, she said. I did not know exactly what she was asking permission for, but I said yes. She lowered herself to one knee with a fluency that told me she was used to animals and touched the top of my wolf's head with the flat of her hand. He leaned into it. Behind me I heard Furwick draw breath. I heard Rannick make a sound that he suppressed quickly. My guard had watched my wolf for 20 years. They knew what this was. I did not look at any of them. I looked at the woman kneeling in the wet salt air with her hand on my wolf's head, and I felt something shift in my chest, the faintest pressure, as if something that had been very still for a very long time had made the smallest possible movement. I had not felt that in years. I was not prepared for it. I chose, in that moment, to set it aside and do what I had come here to do. Tell me about the inside of the fortress, I said. She looked up. I'll need to show you, she said. A map won't do it. The passages don't look like passages from inside, they look like walls. You need to know which stone to press in which order and where the road runs. It's a sequence. My father taught it to me as a child. She paused. I've never told anyone, not in the 4 years since Corvith took the island. She said this last part without looking at Furwick, but I suspected it was for his benefit. You're willing to take me in yourself, I said. Yes, again that careful single word. Why? She was quiet for a moment, and I understood that she was going to give me a true answer rather than a useful one. There is a difference. Useful answers are shaped to produce a desired response. True answers are simply what happened. My father built his life on that island, she said. He was the keeper for 40 years. He maintained the passages, kept the records, tended the gate marks. When Corvith took it, my father walked away because he was old and he had no recourse. He spent the last 2 years of his life on the shore looking at Ironhold and not speaking much. She touched my wolf's ear once and then stood up. I don't want Corvith inside those walls any longer than necessary, and you have a son in there. She said it simply, not as leverage, not as sentiment, as information. I made my decision. You'll come with me, with a small group, 4 wolves, myself, and Rannick. We go tonight, dark crossing, before the moon rises. Furwick stepped forward again. My lord, I must advise against. Lord Furwick, I said, if you have a better plan to get my son out of Ironhold, please present it now. He did not have one. Nobody had one. They'd had 3 weeks and nobody had one. The tide, Bryn told me, would be lowest in 4 hours. That was when we should go. I will try to explain what it was to stand beside her at the water's edge before we crossed, in the dark, with the fortress rising ahead of us. I had not stood beside someone in that particular way, as an equal, as a companion, as a person whose presence was known and acknowledged rather than administrative, in a long time. Since my mate died, I had stood before people or behind them or above them in the technical sense of authority, not beside. There is a particular quality to standing beside someone when you are both looking at something difficult ahead of you, and she had it. She did not try to reassure me. She did not pretend the crossing was not what it was. She stood in the dark, looked at the water, and then looked at me and said, "Are you ready?" As if she already knew that I was and was simply marking the moment. We crossed in a flat-bottomed boat, 6 of us, 4 of my best, Rannick, Bryn, and myself. My wolf came. He had not left her heel since he sat at her feet on the shore, and I had stopped being surprised by it. I watched him in the boat. He was calmer than I had seen him since before Aldrich was taken. His attention divided between the water and her, and it occurred to me that he was navigating by something I could not fully see. The island grew as we crossed. Ironhold at distance looks like a dark shape in the water. Up close it is enormous. The stone goes up 40 feet from the water line, sheer and dark, without obvious handholds. Rannick looked up at it and said nothing, which was how I knew he was registering something he had not registered from shore. "Not here," Bryn said quietly. She directed us along the base of the wall, east, to a section of stone that looked, to my eyes, identical to every other section of stone. She put her hand on it and traced something with her fingertips, a pattern I could not see in the dark, feeling by texture. "Here," she said. She stepped back. "The entrance is here, but it won't respond to me from the outside. My father sealed it from the inside when he left. I need you to understand that we're going to have to go in through a different way, one that Corvith's people don't know about." "Where?" She looked at me. "The water line on the north face. My father showed it to me once. It requires going into the water." I looked at the sea. It was not warm. I looked at her. She was wearing a Mendy dress that reached her knees, and she had no extra clothing with her. "Can you swim it?" I said. "I've done it before." When I was 12, she said without embarrassment. "I imagine I'm better at it now." I almost smiled. I had not almost smiled in 3 weeks. I let it go and said, "North face, lead the way." The passage she found was not a passage to my eyes. It was a channel, a low gap in the rock at the water line, visible only when the water receded at the tide's lowest point, and only for a window of perhaps 20 minutes. I went in first at her instruction. She guided me through by voice, telling me where the roof of the channel dropped and where it rose again, how far I had to go on my breath before the first air pocket, where to find the handhold in the dark. My wolf came in beside me. He was a water wolf. He had swum more rivers than I could count, and he moved through the channel easily, his body finding the space by instinct. I felt his shoulder against mine at the first air pocket, and I held onto the handhold and breathed and felt, very faintly, that warmth in my chest again. She came through after Rannick. When she surfaced in the first air pocket, she pushed the water from her face and looked around at the stone ceiling, and I could see, in the faint phosphorescence that lived in the cracks here, that something in her had shifted. She was home. She had not been home in 4 years, and she was inside it again, water-cold and shivering, and her face was quiet in a way that went all the way down. "Are you all right?" I said. "Yes," she said. "It's the same." She touched the stone above her. "My father carved his name here, see, there in the rock. He did it the year I was born." She showed me 2 letters, worn but legible, D. I looked at it, then I looked at her. "He was a good keeper," I said, because it was what was true, and she had given me truth, so I gave it back. She did not say anything, but she looked at me in a way that made the warmth in my chest steady rather than flicker, and then she said, "The passage goes up from here. Drive from this point. Follow me." She knew every stone. There is no other way to say it. She moved through the inside of Ironhold the way I moved through Greywarden, the way you move through a place your body has mapped in sleep, without hesitation, without looking at your feet, turning corners by memory rather than sight. She had grown up here. Her father had taken her through these roads as a child, and the roads had stayed in her, all of them, every branch, every dead end, every door that looked like a wall. She led us through 3 passages before we reached the first gate. The first gate was a stone door, seamless from the outside, set into a wall in a narrow corridor. There was no visible mechanism. She put her left hand flat against a section of stone to the door's left, a handprint-sized section, smoother than the surrounding rock, and held it there for a count of 5. The door opened. Not loudly, not dramatically. It drew back into the wall an inch, then 2, then silently all the way, with a quality of extreme age, the way very old things move when they have been properly maintained. My father built his life on that island. He maintained the passages. The gate moved as if it had been maintained the week before. She stepped through, we followed. The second gate was similar but higher, a larger section of smooth stone at shoulder height, and it required a different hand, her right, and the palm rather than the fingers. It opened in the same manner, slow and certain. At the third gate she stopped. She stopped and I almost walked into her in the dark. My wolf stopped too and pressed against her leg. She put her hand on his back without looking down, not reassurance, just contact. "This is the Deep Gate," she said. Her voice was very low. "My father told me it was the original entrance, the first gate, before they built the outer walls. He said the builders tuned it to the bloodline so that it would know Keeper's blood even if no one living remembered the password. He said it was the only gate in the island that couldn't be sealed from inside." She paused. "I've never opened this one. My father opened it once to show me it would open, and then he closed it and he said keep this one for emergencies." She made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. "I think this qualifies." She pressed her palm flat against the stone. The stone lit. Not brightly, not like a torch, not like a flame, but with a deep, resonant amber light that came from inside the rock itself and spread outward from her palm in a slow pulse, like a heartbeat. The pattern of it mapped her hand, every line, every mark, and then went wider, filling the cracks in the stonework, running down the wall and up to the ceiling in thin veins of amber, and the whole corridor smelled suddenly of something old. Salt and iron and the particular dry stone smell of a place that has been sealed for a long time. The gate opened. My wolf exhaled one long, slow breath, his muzzle pressing briefly against Bryn's wrist. Then he looked up at me. I have known him my entire life. I have never heard him make that sound before, not relief, not recognition, something quieter and more absolute. Certainty. As if he had been waiting for this specific moment and had now confirmed to himself that it had arrived. I looked at Bryn. The amber light was fading, but her palm still held its trace of it, a faint luminosity in the lines of her skin, dying slowly like an ember. She was looking at me with an expression I could not fully name. It was not pride, not triumph, not fear. It was something humbler than any of those. Responsibility. She had carried this all her life. This knowledge, this bloodline, this particular quality of being the last one who knew, and she had brought it here, and it had opened. And now whatever happened next was real. "My lord," Rannick said softly behind me. I turned. He was pointing through the open gate down the passage beyond. I could smell my son. 20 yards ahead, the corridor opened into something larger, and Aldrich's scent was there, alive, not sick, not bleeding. He was alive. I moved through the gate. What followed I will not describe in full, not because it was terrible, though parts of it were, but because it belongs to my son, not to me, and I am not in the habit of making his captivity into a story for my own purposes. What I will say is this. Corvith had left 4 guards and gone himself to the mainland when he heard I was on the coast, intending to negotiate rather than face what I would bring. It was a tactical mistake of the order that defines the difference between a strategist and a man who has been lucky. His 4 guards were competent, but not prepared for my wolves coming through a passage that did not exist on any map Corvith had found in 4 years of searching the island's records. The guards were neutralized. Aldrich was in a room at the corridor's end, behind a locked door, an ordinary door, iron-bolted, not a keeper's gate. He was thin and pale and furious, which is the right response to 3 weeks in a stone room. He looked at me when the door opened and said, "I told Corvith you'd find a way in." "I didn't find a way in," I said. "She did." He looked past me at Bryn, who was standing back in the corridor with my wolf at her side. His expression shifted from fury to something more complicated. He was the best of me. He had his mother's intelligence and his mother's quality of attention. "My lord," he said to her, he was 24 years old and he had his mother's manners. "I'm in your debt." She said, "It was your father's expedition. I was the guide." He looked at me again. I said nothing. I put my arm around his shoulder and walked him toward the gate. We crossed back before dawn. The tide had come in, so we used the eastern entrance, the door she had shown me from outside, which opened from within without the bloodline. We came off the island on the old dock side where Corvith had cut stone over the original entrance, and she showed us the secondary egress, a set of carved steps descending from a wall section that pivoted. She had known these too. She had known all of them. On the boat going home, Aldrich slept with his head against the hull. Rannick and the 4 wolves were quiet in the way that men are quiet after a thing has gone right when it could easily have gone otherwise. My wolf was beside Bryn. He had not left her side in Ironhold, not once. I sat across from her. She was cold. She had been cold since the channel crossing and hadn't said so, but I could see it in the set of her jaw. She was holding herself together against it, not shivering only because she was choosing not to. I removed my cloak and held it out. She looked at it for a moment. "My lords." "Take it," I said, not harshly. It was not an order, even though it sounded like one. I wasn't sure how to say it any other way because I had been making sounds like orders for so long that I had lost the other shapes. She took it, she wrapped it around herself, and she looked at me across the boat and the thing in my chest that had been moving, slowly, all night, building so carefully that I had kept finding reasons not to name it, became undeniable. It was not a new thing. That was the part I couldn't explain. It felt like memory, like recognizing something I had known once and then lost track of, and had now found again in a stone corridor 40 feet below sea level. My wolf's certainty had not been surprise. It had been confirmation. I looked at her and the bond, the fated mate's bond, which I had not felt since the night I met my wife, and which I had in my grief believed had been given to me only once and would not come again. The bond was there. It was quieter than the first time. It was not the lightning strike of youth, not the immediate declaration that rewires everything. It was a slow, certain warmth, like a fire that has been built properly, carefully from the base up with dry wood and good stone, and will burn for a very long time. I sat with it on the boat going home, watching her, and did not speak. She did not speak either. There was nothing to say, not yet. We had just brought my son back from a sea fortress. There would be time. But I knew, the way my wolf knew, the way the deep gate had known her palm, that she was mine, that she had been mine before either of us understood it, and that the debt was not hers to me, as she had tried to tell Aldrich. The debt, if there was one, ran the other way. Greywarden in autumn smelled of wood smoke and salt wind. I had always loved it best in autumn, the great hall warm against the sea cold, the banners darkened with age, the stone floors that had been walked by my bloodline for 300 years. I came home to it now with my son alive and a woman who was not yet my mate walking at my left side, and I felt the particular quality of a moment that is going to stay with you. My council had assembled in the great hall. This was not unusual when I returned from anything significant, the council gathers. But the quality of the assembly was unusual. Furwick was there and the other lords and the pack's senior wolves, and it was clear from the room's particular silence that word had come ahead of us, possibly from Rannoch, possibly from the shore scouts, that the mission had succeeded. The silence was the silence of people waiting to understand the meaning of what they have been told. Aldrich walked in on his own feet. That changed the room. I heard the exhaled breath of 15 people who had been holding something back for 3 weeks, and I understood it because I had been holding it too. I let Aldrich walk to the council. I let the reunion happen. It was not my moment. It was his and the pack's. I stood back and watched my son greet his people, and I felt the particular quiet pride of a father who has nothing to claim credit for beyond having had a good son. Bryn had stopped just inside the great hall's doorway. She was still wearing my cloak. She was looking at the hall with the expression I'd seen in the passage when she saw her father's name carved in the stone, a recognition that goes deeper than thought, older than language. This hall was not hers, she had never been here, but a hall, a fire, a high stone ceiling with smoke going up through it. These things have a grammar that some people know in their bones. My wolf was at her heel. I walked back to her. She looked at me when she heard my step, not alarmed, simply attentive. She had a quality of stillness that was different from guardedness. It was not the stillness of a person holding something back, but of a person who did not fill silence unnecessarily. I had been surrounded by people who filled silence for 20 years, and I had not noticed how much of my attention that required until I stood beside someone who did not. "Come with me," I said. Not to the council. Across the hall to where I stood when I addressed the full assembly, the central floor beneath the hanging banners. She came. My wolf came. The council had gone quiet again. "Lord Furwick," I said. Furwick turned. He was a man who managed his expressions carefully, but he was not, at that moment, managing them well. He was looking at Bryn, at my cloak around her shoulders, at my wolf, and performing a rapid and clearly uncomfortable recalculation. "My lord," he said, 3 weeks ago you told me the woman standing beside me was of doubtful allegiance and possible sympathy to Lord Corvith." A pause. "Yes, my lord, that was my assessment." "Your assessment," I said, "was wrong." I said it without heat. I had no interest in humiliating Furwick. I had an interest in accuracy. Bryn, daughter of Davin, keeper of the bloodline of Ironhold's founders, led me through the keeper's passages tonight. She opened 3 gates, including the deep gate, which is not opened in living memory. She guided my wolves through a fortress that none of them, including myself, could have navigated alone. I paused. She did this for no promised reward. She did this because it was right, and she is standing in my hall. The council was very still. I want to be clear about what I mean by that, I said. She is not a guest. She is not here on sufferance or under assessment. She is standing in my hall at my left side, where she will remain for as long as she chooses. Furwick opened his mouth. He closed it, then he bowed. It was not a performance. I would have found a performance insulting, and so would she. It was a bow of a man who has been wrong and knows it, and chooses the honest response over the defensive one. I respected him a degree more for it than I had before. The other lords and senior wolves followed. Not dramatically, not the slow ripple of a ceremony, not the staged moment. They simply bowed, one after another, because the Alpha King's logic was clear, and his position was clear, and they were wolves who understood that the Alpha's judgment on matters of pack and bloodline was not typically a debating point. Aldrich from across the hall caught my eye. He looked at Bryn. He looked at me. He made a very small gesture with his head, a kind of acknowledgement, and then he looked away because he had his mother's intelligence and understood the importance of not making a significant moment unnecessarily large. I turned to Bryn. She was looking at the council. I could not read her expression precisely. She had a face that had grown accustomed to composure as a survival strategy, and composure was what it showed. But underneath that, I thought I could see something working, not emotions she was managing, but simply the fact of the moment arriving and being different from what 3 weeks of coast living and 4 years of exile and a lifetime of being the last of something had led her to expect. My wolf pressed his muzzle against her hand. She looked down at him, then up at me. I stepped closer, not close enough to presume, close enough to speak quietly, under the range of the council's ears. I had something to say to her that belonged to her alone. "You told me this morning," I said, "that you came because Corvith had been in your island long enough and because I had a son in there." I paused. "Both of those things are true. But I think there's a third reason you didn't name." She looked at me steadily. "My wolf walked to you," I said. "On the shore before the crossing, before we spoke 2 minutes, he walked to you. He has not done that since the night I met my mate." I was stating information, not making a claim. I needed her to understand the distinction. "I don't know what you felt. I know what I felt on the boat coming home. I know what I feel now." I stopped. "I am not a man who speaks about these things easily, and I am telling you this so that nothing about what I am offering you is unclear. I am offering you a home, an equal standing in this hall, and my full and undivided loyalty. In whatever order and at whatever pace suits you. There is no obligation." She was quiet for a moment. "You said my wolf walked to me," she said, "and the bond, as if those are 2 separate things." "They're not," I said. "I know," she said. "I felt it in the passage." She looked down at the floor of the great hall and then up at the high ceiling and around at the hall itself, the fire, the banners, the smoke going up. "I've been the keeper's daughter my whole life," she said quietly. "The keeper's daughter who lost the island, the last of something." She looked back at me. "I didn't know there was something else I could be." "There is," I said. "A name you give me in front of your council," she said. It was not quite a question and not quite a test. It was simply identifying what had just happened. "A name I'd give you however and whenever you want it," I said. "Tonight if you want, a year from now if that's what you need. The bond will wait. I've waited longer." She was quiet again. Then she said, and this was only for me, no council, no pack, no great hall moment, "Tonight will do." I did not say anything else. I put out my hand. She took it. My wolf sat down between us, his tail moving once against the stone floor, the slow, certain wag of an animal that has concluded a long effort, and then settled and was still. They have a story in Vardenmoor now, in the villages along the coast, and in the great hall at Greywarden, about the night the Alpha King took 12 men to the impenetrable sea fortress, and came back before dawn with his son and his mate. The story improves with each telling. By last winter there were 17 gates in the telling and a storm, neither of which were true. What is true is this. The deep gate of Ironhold woke to Keeper's blood for the first time in living memory, and the woman who woke it walked out of the fortress beside the Alpha King and has not left Greywarden since. She tends the records now. This was her own decision. She had said in the first weeks that she wanted something useful to do, and useful for Bryn meant something that had been done wrong that she could do correctly. The old island keeper's records had been brought to Greywarden when her father left Ironhold. Corvith had found none of them, because her father had boxed them and left them with a trusted family on the mainland coast, and they had been waiting, covered in oilskin, in a cellar in Comrie. She brought them herself in a boat on a Tuesday and spent the better part of a month organizing them into the Greywarden archive. She knows more about the history of this coastline than anyone alive. Furwick told me once, with the careful expression of a man who has decided that honesty is the most prudent policy, that Lady Bryn's consultation on the Ironhold matter had materially assisted the resolution, and that her appointment to the Council's records advisory would, if I were so inclined, not be unwelcome. It was the most elaborate apology in my experience, and I acknowledged it in the spirit it was offered. Aldrich loves her. He had loved her from the moment she looked at him in the corridor and said, "It was your father's expedition, I was the guide." He had come to me privately the third day after the crossing and said, "She reminds me of Mother." He meant it as the highest thing he could say, and it was. I told him I knew. My wolf sleeps at her feet in the records room. He has always been where I am. Now he is where she is, which amounts to the same thing. This is what I know about Bryn, daughter of Davin, last keeper of Ironhold, who is Lady of Greywarden now. She does not ask for things lightly, and she does not accept them lightly, and she knows the difference between the place where a wall looks solid and the place where, if you press your hand flat against it and hold it there, the stone will remember her. She has opened every door she has touched in this hall. Not literally, but the council is easier than it was. The records are cleaner. Aldrich laughs more. I speak occasionally about things that are not strategy or administration. This morning I sat beside her at the table where she was working, and I watched her read, and I understood, in the quiet way of someone who has come through something long and difficult and arrived somewhere unexpected, that I had been sealed too, not by an enemy, by grief, by years, by the particular patience required of a man who expects nothing to change. She had pressed her hand against that as well. It had opened. I did not tell her this. I didn't need to. She already knew, the way she already knew where the passage turned and where the air pocket was, and where her father had carved his name into the rock for a daughter he expected to outlast him. She looked up from her work and caught me watching. "You've been sitting there for 10 minutes, she said. "I know," I said. She considered this. "Anything you wanted to say?" "No," I said. "I just wanted to sit here." She nodded as if this were a perfectly normal thing, and went back to her reading. My wolf's tail moved once against the floor. I stayed.